Hello, 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 beautiful people, and welcome to episode 26 of Survivor Strong, the podcast for survivors of childhood trauma. I'm your host, Yvonne Sandomir. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you today. Today, we're delving into the minimum age requirements for sexual consent, marriage, and the varying laws across the United States. Thankfully, I found a very good resource, unchainedatLast.org, made researching this topic very easy. They actually just completed their comprehensive study in April of 2021. So all of the information that I'm pulling is from this particular study. You can always visit their website, which is www.unchainedatLast.org, for more information about, who they are, and about more information about the state that you live in. If you want to chime in, of course, you can send in your questions through the Q&A right over here to get any conversation started. And, don't be shy. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask anything that you want. So, for this study, to prepare for this study, Unchained requested marriage age data based on marriage certificates from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Specifically, Unchained asked for de-identified data on the ages and genders of all people married in that particular state, along with their spouse's age and gender in each year between 2000 and 2018. So just so you know, de-identified data just basically means that there's no information within the documents that could identify individuals. So before we get into the findings, let's clarify a few things here. First of all, before we get into that, I need to make sure that I'm broadcasting here. And I am. Okay, perfect. So before we get into the findings, I want to clarify a few things because there seems to be some confusion, some confusion about what is child marriage. And child marriage is very simple. It's a marriage where one or both parties are under the age of 18. It's considered child marriage whether they have the consent of their parents or not. Underage is underage. And a lot of people also want to know, what is statutory rape versus rape? What's the difference? And why does this matter? So statutory rape is defined by statute as sexual intercourse with a person under the age of consent, whether the person is willing or not. Now, in statutory rape, there's usually no overt force or threat involved. So imagine this is your 15-year-old who wants to date the 20-year-old who says, oh, I'm so in love with this 20-year-old. I am consenting to everything. Whether they say that they are consenting or not, because they are under the age of consent, it doesn't matter. It's still considered statutory rape. Whereas rape is with force, without consent, and is horrific. So you can see the differences between the two. So now let's get into the findings, because this is what was very interesting for me when I started looking into this. So data shows that a minor may marry with parental consent in 44 states. However, with judicial rulings and exceptions, child marriage is basically legal in some capacity in every single state in the United States. And in this study, marriage certificates actually confirmed that children as young as 10 years old have been married between 2000 and 2018. And I'll share a little bit more about this later because I have that broken down. It's very interesting data. And you might be surprised to find that Some states have no minimum age restriction, even with parental consent, meaning a parent can say, hey, this is my 10-year-old daughter. I want her to marry this person. She has my consent. And as long as the parents say it's okay, the state cannot prevent that marriage from moving forward, which is absolutely insane to me when I think about this. I know that a lot of states actually make an exception for minor parties in the event of a pregnancy, which is a whole different issue that we'll get into a little bit later. I just want to kind of go over the data first. So, 11 states have no minimum age with parental consent, and those states are California, Idaho, Maine, Mississippi, Michigan, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Washington, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Only 18 states require judges to consider the minor's best interest when deciding whether or not they should approve these marriages. Think about that. Judges are not required to consider the minor's best interest when they're making this decision. Think about that. How is that possible? How is it possible that only 18 states require and say, okay, judge, you have to consider the minor's best interest when deciding? But then it's these same lawmakers who, want to talk about abortion and get involved in that. But, when they have this minor standing in front of them looking to get married, they don't have to consider what's in their best interest. It's crazy. 7 states permit pregnancy to lower the minimum marrying age. That's Arkansas, Indiana, Maryland, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, and Oklahoma. Now, these 7 states basically say if a minor comes to us, they want to get married, and they're pregnant, and they're under the age of consent, a judge can rule that they're able to marry based on being pregnant. We'll get into that again, like I said, a little bit later. Now, this really surprised me. This next point really shocked me. 11 states allow clerks to issue a marriage license to minors without a judge signing off on it. That's Florida, the state that I live in, Maryland, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oregon, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Vermont, and Wisconsin. In those states, a clerk can issue a marriage license to a minor without even having to request a judge sign off on it. Think about that. Think about that. And what's even more surprising is when you learn that basically you're considered married when you sign the marriage license. That's your marriage date. So if these states allow clerks to issue licenses, they are essentially marrying minors without a judge being involved. It's crazy. And of course, we know this, and I didn't dig into the details about, but child marriage does occur more frequently among specific ethnic and religious groups, and, like I said, I didn't dig into that because that's a whole other issue that, we can't really address all in one podcast. But to be clear, so what's wrong with child marriage anyway? Let's start with some of the obvious things, right? No one under the age of 18 can sign a legal document. They can't vote, join a gym. They can't buy cigarettes. They can't seek health care on their own or even get a driver's license without a parent being there. The minimum age to enter a domestic violence shelter is 18, which leaves an underage spouse largely unprotected against their abusive partners. They can't run, especially if they're in a situation where their parents have forced them to marry. Protecting yourself is nearly impossible if a parent forces you into marriage. If a minor runs away, they're considered a runaway and are usually just returned home to the parents. So minors who are trying to run away from child marriage that's being forced upon them by their parents have to be returned to those same parents because they're a minor. But it's okay if they get married. It doesn't make sense, right? So now on to maybe the not so obvious stuff that maybe you haven't thought about. Marriage to a minor is a guise for abuse and exploitation, and it really has devastating consequences even if the child is willing. The child may seem willing now, but later on, they realize it's not what they wanted. It's not what they deserved. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but a couple is officially married on the date the marriage license is signed, as long as the probate courts receive their certificate within 30 days. And so this speaks to those 11 states who can issue a marriage license to minors without a judge. And so they can get married, and that gives them 30 days to submit and then disappear wherever they want to disappear, run away, hide, who knows? And many states, such as Alabama, no longer even require a ceremony. So they don't even have to show that the community and the family agree and support this marriage. And even more surprisingly, only one spouse must show up to probate court to record the marriage certificate. So that means essentially this adult person, most of the time male, could coerce their minor victim into signing this document. And that minor doesn't even have to be present with the judge to tell them or show them that they signed that document freely and of their own will. They don't even have to show up. And of course, this leaves the minor even more unprotected. And surprisingly, many states actually allow couples to request marriage licenses outside the county where the couple resides. So what would be the purpose of that? Why would you need to go outside of your county to get married? Unless you're trying to hide it from the family, trying to hide it from the people that you know, trying to hide it from those who are around you. You're trying to get away with something. Now, I'm sure there may be other legitimate reasons that any one of you may be able to provide, but in this conversation, I find it difficult to really identify any of those. And in some states, again, such as Alabama, only one parent is needed for consent, effectively shutting out parental rights for one of the parents. So if you have a couple, they're unmarried, divorced, or married, it doesn't matter, and one parent says, yes, she can get married, and the other parent says, no, you just need that one parent to say yes. what is, how is that, how is that in the best interest of our kids? Shutting out one of the parents who may have very valid reasons for not consenting, such as wanting to protect their child. And so a parent can't even prevent and protect their own child from the other parent in these states. One parent says, yep, well, that's it. My time's up. Can't do anything about it. You know, we need to address how, when you think about it, when you really think about it, how parental consent is nothing but legal child sex trafficking. It's illegal to sell our children, right? We can't sell our children, but parents can give them away. Parents can say, okay, I have this minor, I'm going to give them to this adult person to abuse them. And because I'm saying it's okay, I am now justifying and making it legal for this person to abuse children. The law states we cannot sell our children for marriage. We can't do that. We can't say, here's my daughter, give me $50,000 and you can marry her. But you can say, here's my daughter for free, you can marry her. It makes no sense. Giving children away, selling children, it's the same thing. The law says we can't force kids to go through any form of marriage, and yet parents consenting, even if the kid doesn't want to, have to get married. And the law also states that you cannot use children for immoral purposes. So how is underage marriage still legal? And how is an adult having sex with children not immoral? And how can wanting to marry a child so you can have sex with that child, how is that not immoral? Because the thing is, the implications of child marriage, that's really what matters. And this is what I want you to really hear. Unchained at Last believes that policymakers should really be deeply concerned about child marriage, including at the ages of 16 or 17, for three main reasons, which I'll read directly from their website because I don't want to get anything wrong. So the first reason is child marriage can easily be forced marriage. Minors, even highly mature 16 or 17-year-olds, do not have the legal rights they need to navigate a contract as serious as marriage. Minors who leave home to escape from an abusive spouse or impending forced marriage are typically considered runaways under state law. Police might return them to their homes against their will, and in some states, minors can even be charged with a status offense for running away. Police might even arrest an advocate at Unchained who helped a minor leave home. How is this possible? How is it possible that a child is unable to escape abuse? A minor who does manage to run away from a forced marriage probably has nowhere to go, since Unchained has found that most domestic violence shelters do not accept unaccompanied minors. Youth shelters are not a solution. They typically notify parents their children are there and house children only for about 21 days while they work on a reunification plan. So these shelters that these minors have to turn to, they can't even go there because they're a minor and they're unaccompanied. And who are they going to have bring them there? The parents who are forcing them to get married, or the spouse who has all of the control over them? Retaining an attorney is very difficult. Contracts with children, including retainer agreements with attorneys, usually are avoidable under state law. Only the most generous attorneys would agree to represent a child. Think about that. A child is helpless, has no voice, and they can't retain an attorney to get them out of it. Now, this one, as Unchained at Last states, perhaps most shockingly, children typically are not allowed to initiate a legal proceeding, such as seeking a protective order or filing for a divorce, unless they act through a guardian or other representative under state law. So, a child who has been entered into a marriage, they can't initiate any type of legal proceedings to protect themselves in the event of abuse. They can't file for divorce when they realize that this isn't what they want. They are basically trapped in these marriages, put in these situations by their parents, or, let's face it, a predator. And it continues on and it says, some states have tried to close these legal traps by automatically emancipating minors upon their marriage. However, such emancipation arrives too late to prevent a child from being forced to marry in the first place. The child must undergo the trauma of the forced marriage before getting the limited legal rights that emancipation brings. And an emancipated minor's rights are limited. Such a minor still may face difficulties leaving home, entering a shelter, or taking other steps to escape an unwanted marriage. Further, automatic emancipation likely ends parents' financial obligation to their child, regardless of the child's financial situation. Unchained has seen such teens end up homeless after their marriage failed and their parents refused to allow them back home. Think about that. So once the parents say, yes, you can go marry these adults, we're not financially responsible for you anymore. And oh, by the way, when you realize that you're being abused and you no longer want to be in that relationship, don't turn to us for anything because we've got nothing for you. You're emancipated now. So that means that we're not required under law to provide for you. So not only are the parents basically trafficking their children, sex trafficking, they're abandoning them and causing even more trauma when they refuse to help out financially. It's insane to me how these laws even became to be. You know, and I just want to remind you, this is still only number one of the 3 reasons why this is such a bad idea. We haven't even gotten to number 2 yet. But number 1 concludes by saying, when children reach out to Unchained to ask for help escaping a forced marriage and learn about their limited options, many despair and turn to suicide attempts. Death seems like the only way out for them. Because if you think about it, it is. It is. They can't do any legal proceedings. They can't go to their parents if their parents have forced them. They're stuck. So the reason number 2 is child marriage is a human rights abuse that destroys American girls' lives. Now, I know I say girls, and I have to say, of course, it's not always, the girls being the minors, but let's face it, that's the majority. Um, let's just face facts here. But marriage before 18, including at 16 or 17, is a human rights abuse, according to the U.S. State Department. It produces devastating, lifelong repercussions for American girls, destroying their education, economic opportunities, and health. It significantly increases a woman's risk of experiencing domestic violence, and it almost always ends in divorce. Almost always. Much less is known about the impact of child marriage on American boys, since most of the children who marry in the U.S. are girls. The research on the impacts of child marriage has been focused on the girls. Like I said, I mean, there are some boys, but, the majority are the girls, and we have to accept the reality of that. The third reason that they give is child marriage undermines statutory rape laws, which is why I wanted to get into what exactly statutory rape is. In most states and under federal law, sex with a child that would otherwise be considered rape, in some cases felony rape, becomes legal within marriage. In those situations, the marriage license becomes a get out of jail free card for a child rapist. In some states, statutory rape remains a crime within marriage. The marriage is legal, but sex within the marriage is rape. In those situations, the state that issues the marriage license sends a child home to be raped. Think about that. They're allowing marriage even though they know that allowing the marriage violates the sexual consent laws. As this study showed, 60,000 marriages since 2000 occurred at an age or spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. And 88% gave a rapist a get out of jail free card, while 12% sent a child home to be raped. Either way, the state made a mockery of its statutory rape laws. What's the point in having statutory rape laws if they could just be undermined by child marriage? It makes no sense why a state would say that you can't have sex with a minor, but you can marry one. It just doesn't make sense to me. Really. Child marriage brings no benefit other than to child rapists. This does not benefit the minor spouses. A mature 17-year-old who is in love and wants to marry can wait a matter of months to marry without suffering any harm. A teen couple that gets pregnant can easily co-parent outside of marriage until they are both 18. Establishing paternity is a simple process in most states. You do not have to be married to establish paternity. A child who is in an abusive home deserves resources and options that do not involve entering a contractual sexual relationship. So that's just three of the many reasons why. And this goes on to talk about policy failures, which I think I'll go back to this in a few moments. But, to get started, so how many children were married in your state? Let's look at the numbers by state. For the sake of time, we will focus on the 10 states with the highest rates of child marriage between 2000 and 2018. So, number 10 on our list here is Arizona. Arizona had 8,795 child marriages. The minimum age to marry in Arizona with parental consent is 16, and they do have a maximum 3-year age gap. So a 16-year-old technically should only be able to marry up to a 19-year-old. The minimum age without parental consent is 18, which makes sense. Can't do anything until you're 18. And in Arizona, the age of sexual consent is 18, with a maximum age gap of 2 years. So you see how that's already a contradiction. How is it possible that you can marry someone within 3 years, but you can only have sex with someone within 2? It makes no sense. And in Arizona, a child is allowed to marry before they can even legally consent to sex. They can't consent until 18, but they can marry with their parents' consent at 16. Something is wrong with that. Number 9 on the list is Alabama. Alabama had 9,166 child marriages. The minimum age to marry with parental consent in Alabama is 16. And in Alabama, they actually require parental consent from both parents, which I think is a beautiful thing. The minimum age without parental consent is 18. And the age of sexual consent is 16, with a maximum age difference of 2 years. So at least in Alabama's laws, at least they are aligned a little bit. Not that I think it's okay, but at least it's aligned. And in Alabama, the law states that the maximum age difference can be only 3 years. Only 3 years difference. But again, looking here for sex, it's a maximum age gap of 2 years. So actually, it's not as streamlined as I thought. You can't say, you can't have sex with someone who's more than 2 years older than you, but you can marry someone who is 3. It doesn't make sense. Now, the youngest person married in Alabama between 2000 and 2018 was 13 years old. 13. And the largest age gap that they found was 60 years. And that's when a 74-year-old man married a 14-year-old girl. What happened to that 2 or 3 year age gap? What happened to that? Number 8 on the list is Tennessee. Tennessee had 9,783 child marriages between 2000 and 2018. The minimum age to marry with parental consent is 16, and you have to be 18 without your parents' consent. The age of sexual consent is 18 years old with a 4-year age difference. Okay, so here we go again. You can marry at 16, but you can't agree to have sex until 18. The youngest person married in Tennessee was 13 years old. 13. And in Tennessee, more than 1,950 of those marriages in 2014 had age gaps large enough to constitute a sexual crime. But it's undermined because the marriage is legal. Number 7 on our list is Georgia. Georgia has 10,123 child marriages. With consent, the minimum age is 16. Without consent is 18. And the age of sexual consent is 16 years old. Between 2000 and 2018, up to 17% of Georgian women married before the age of 18. 17%. And what's interesting is Georgia has a law that states that cohabitation with a person under 16 years old shall be punishable by up to 3 years in jail unless married. You hear that? Unless married. So again, you can just marry your victim and don't have to worry about getting thrown in jail or paying for what you've done. Number 6 is Kentucky. Kentucky had 11,251 child marriages. The minimum age to marry with or without parental consent is 18 years old in Kentucky. However, the vast majority of the marriages that they found were marriages between a minor and an adult, and the largest age gap was 35 years. Sexual consent, the age for that is 16. And surprisingly, a child may marry as young as 16 or younger than 16 if they're pregnant and a judge approves. So they just completely overlook that the 16-year-old is pregnant, which was caused by either statutory rape or rape, but they just brush that aside because they want to get married. It makes no sense. Now, number 5 on the list is North Carolina. North Carolina had 12,637. The minimum age with parental consent is 16 to get married. Without is 18. And the age of sexual consent is 16, with a max age gap of 4 years. But here's what's interesting. North Carolina is actually known as the place for adults to marry kids, reflecting the high number of out-of-state requests recorded. 93% of marriages in North Carolina are between a minor and an adult between 2000 and 2019. The maximum age gap allowed for 16 to 17-year-olds is 4 years. However, the largest age gap that they found in this state was 32 years when a 49-year-old married a 17-year-old girl. Number 4 on the list is my home state, where I live, Florida. 17,274 child marriages. Now, in Florida, the minimum age to marry is 16. That's with parental consent, 18 without, and the age of sexual consent is 18. Now, they say in Florida, no one under 16 may marry under any circumstance. And so I'd be interested to see if there were any, if there was evidence to show that marriages did occur under the age of 16, but this particular study does not specify either way on that. Number 3 on this list is Nevada. Nevada had 17,403 child marriages. The minimum age with parental consent is 16, without consent is 18, and sexual consent is 16. Children younger than 16 may marry with parental consent and district court approval. So in Nevada, you need more than just your parent to say that you can do it. You have to have the district court to say, okay, I agree with your parents agreeing to you getting married. And children as young as 13 years old may marry with court permission. So the court can say this 13-year-old can marry for whatever reason. Now, second on the list is California. And to be honest, I thought that it would be the number one worst when it came to child marriage, only because California has absolutely no minimum age to marry as long as you have parental consent. So I expected them to be number 1, the worst, but they're number 2 on this list. The minimum age without consent is 18, and the age of sexual consent is 18. But you can marry anytime you want as long as your parents are willing to give you away and agree that you can get married. In California, there are no laws to prevent child marriage. No laws whatsoever, and no minimum age with parental consent. No laws. No. I feel like there's a loophole there that could be fixed. Now, the number one state, when I say number one, I mean the worst state for child marriage, with 41,774 child marriages between 2000 and 2018. Remember, California was 23,000, so they've essentially doubled, is Texas. Texas, their minimum age with parental consent is 16 to 17 years old. Without consent is 18. And you have to be 17 to give consent, to give sexual consent, with a maximum age difference of 3 years. However, that doesn't matter because a judge can approve marriage at any age. So, those are the 10 worst states that have the most child marriages. Was your state on there? I'd be curious to hear. Now, just because I like to be fair, I did the 10 worst. Now I need to give you the 10 least because I think it's important to point that out too. And even though I would like for these numbers to be 0, considering the numbers that I just gave you, you will see how it's significantly different in many states. So, the 10 states with the fewest child marriages are: number 10, South Dakota. Number 9 is Arkansas with 808. I don't know why, but I expected that number to be higher. I'm sorry, Arkansas. Number 8 on this list is Hawaii. Hawaii only has 795. And the interesting thing about Hawaii is the age of consent, the age of marriage with consent is 15 in Hawaii. And they have very few child marriages. Montana is number 7, and they have 469. Number 6 is North Dakota with only 306. Number 5 is Vermont with 272. Delaware is number 4 with 219. Number 3 on the list is New Hampshire with 206, which I was very surprised to find out that up until recently, you could marry at the age of 13 in New Hampshire with parental consent. I believe it's recently been increased to 16, but for a long time, 13 with the consent of your parents. Number 2 on this list is Rhode Island with 171, and Washington, D.C. only had 77. So I know that's a lot of information that I just gave you. So I know that I kind of read to you a little bit from the website, but just to kind of a recap, why do these laws need to be changed? And it's because the reality is that many of these marriages aren't between two 17-year-olds who are madly in love and just can't wait to start their lives together. It's between an adult and a minor, usually a significant age difference. And there's no reason why it should be allowed. 80% of the 86% rather of these married children are married to adult men. Even though the average spousal age difference was 4 years for this report, 60,000 child marriages since 2000 occurred at an age difference that would be considered a sex crime. How can we ignore the sex crime, wipe away the sex crime, because you have a marriage license? It doesn't make sense. In 88% of those marriages, the marriage license became a get out of jail free card for a would-be rapist. And that's under a state law that specifically allows within marriage what would otherwise be considered statutory rape. In 12% of those marriages, a child was sent home to be raped. The marriage was legal under state law, but sex within the marriage was a crime. Allowing marriage because a minor party is pregnant ignores that the pregnancy is a result of rape or statutory rape, and essentially gives the rapist permission to continue abusing their victim legally. And, you know, I was a little bit surprised to find out that many lawmakers actually rely on their personal stories of their own family members who had been married young, and they see the situations with, their grandparents and great grandparents who married young, and, it turned out okay. You know, they consider this while they're deciding these cases of child marriage. But this really ignores the overwhelming majority of these child marriages that don't work. The marriages that fail, they're only taking into consideration their personal experience. And I think that needs to be changed. It's important to know that child marriage is associated with social isolation because the older spouse likely is controlling and wants to keep them in their power, so they won't allow them to have friends or see family. It is also associated with absence of reproductive control, meaning these adults can just impregnate their victims over and over and over again. And guess what? The minor has no say in it. The minor can't get an abortion. The minor can't get health care for themselves. The minor can't get out of this situation. They're stuck. And it's also associated with dropping out of school, which is another tactic that abusers use to isolate. They get them away from all of their friends or anybody that might tell them that something's not right here. You know, legislators argue that they need to keep the age down because it's an alternative to abortion when it comes to allowing marriage with pregnancy. This is effectively giving abusers full legal access to their victim to continue to abuse and exploit. Getting help is challenging because most legislators are older white Christian men. Let's be honest. That's what we're dealing with. There isn't enough representation there. So what can we do to help? Now that I've given you all of this information, what can we do to help? The first thing that you can do, as with anything, is speak out. Tell people about the minimum age in your state and demand change. Contact your legislators, contact your local government agencies, and talk about this and see what can be done to make changes. You want to report any child marriage around you to the proper authorities. Don't worry about hurting feelings. Don't worry about ruffling feathers. Report any child marriage because it's the right thing to do. And you want to educate friends and family in your community about why it's harmful. Early marriage destroys kids' lives. Many child brides regret their decision later in life and discourage against it, this study shows. They recall missing out on their teen years and because of that suffer from social isolation. And this goes back to losing reproductive control, being barefoot and pregnant all the time because they have no control over when and how they get pregnant. You can become a volunteer at UNICEF. There are other organizations out there, but that's one that I know does a lot of work. But you can also just promise never to be a part of any event that promotes child marriage. If you know someone who is consenting to their child getting married and they invite you, sorry, I can't do that. I can't be a part of that. It's not right. And don't be afraid to speak out to your friends and family members if they suggest such a crazy idea. Protect that child. Don't just let these parents get away with doing what they're doing because you're afraid to speak up and you're afraid to speak out. So, before I go, I want to break down these numbers a little bit more to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about child marriage. The records between 2000 and 2018 confirmed that 5 10-year-olds were married, 1 11-year-old, 14 12-year-olds, 78 13-year-olds, 1,233 14-year-olds, 8,199 15-year-olds, 63,956 16-year-olds, and 148,944 17-year-olds were married between 2000 and 2018. Let that sink in. Let that sink in and research and see what you can do within your community to make a change. I know I'm going to do that. And when I do that, I'll be sure to share my journey and how it's all going to, create change here in Florida when it comes to these child marriage laws. And I hope you do the same thing. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me today for episode 26 of Survivor Strong. If you want to share your story, you want to be a guest right here on Survivor Strong, be sure to go to survivorstrongpodcast.com and complete the Be a Guest tab. I look forward to hearing from you. We will be back in 2 weeks at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to continue our conversation with Julie Bonblank about the 8 types of abuse and much, much more. So make sure you join us live right here on Fireside, YouTube, and Facebook. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. And remember, everyone, you got this. We are all in this together. Until next time.